All right, this is my presentation on opioid abuse. All right, this is Opioid Crisis. You can't see the screen, now you can. That's Matthew. Say hi to Matthew. Matthew, say hi.
Hey.
All right, Opioid Crisis. Our objective for the opioid crisis is identify why it's a crisis, how we can combat it, statistics of abuse, what is the nurse's role, understanding addiction, and questions. All right, so why is it an opioid crisis? Well, it's because 500,000 plus die each year from drug overdose. That alone, 66% was due to opioids in 2016. So from 1999 to now, you are 5 times more likely to die from an opioid overdose, which is a lot. 115 people, Americans, die every day from opioid overdose. So this is almost purely based on fentanyl. From 2013 to 2016, you had a 200% increase in deaths from fentanyl, opioid overdose, and methadone. So combating the crisis, widespread addiction and abuse of opioids prompted change. So the FDA regulated how it's prescribed, who can prescribe it, and where they can prescribe it. On the policies and procedures. They also supported some pharmaceutical companies on how to develop formulas that are less addicting in nature to help with that. And there's already 5 drugs that are approved for those. The CDC had a different approach. They thought of using evidence-based practice and strategies for data collection to try and give each state the resources to combat that. They improved data tracking, and then they also supported healthcare providers with data. So basically the CDC said, we're going to just give you data and you deal with it yourself. So the CDC came up with this, opioid based on state. As you can see, Mississippi is in the purple, one of the highest in the country of number of opioid prescriptions per 100 people. So Mississippi is 96 to 143 out of 100. Yep, higher. So vigilant nurses. Nurses work on the front line and play a critical role in identifying patients with opioid addiction by using a caring, empathetic, and non-judgmental approach. Working with opioid addiction and misuse, nurse must first understand what caused the addiction. Treating addiction is treating the spirit, soul, and the body of the person. This nice little video that we'll like, hopefully.
What causes, say, heroin addiction? This is a really stupid question, right? It's obvious, we all know it. Heroin causes heroin addiction. Here's how it works. If you use heroin for 20 days, by day 21, your body would physically crave the drug ferociously because there are chemical hooks in the drug. That's what addiction means. But there's a catch. Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. If you, for example, break your hip, you'll be taken to a hospital and you'll be given loads of diamorphine for weeks or even months. Diamorphine is heroin. It's in fact much stronger heroin than any addict can get on the street because it's not contaminated by all the stuff drug dealers dilute it with. There are people near you being given loads of deluxe heroin in hospitals right now, so at least some of them should become addicts. But this has been closely studied. It doesn't happen. Your grandmother wasn't turned into a junkie by her hip replacement. Why is that? Our current theory of addiction comes in part from a series of experiments that were carried out earlier in the 20th century. The experiment is simple. You take a rat and put it in a cage with 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every time you run this experiment, the rat will become obsessed with the drugged water and keep coming back for more and more until it kills itself. But in the 1970s, Bruce Alexander, a professor of psychology, noticed something odd about this experiment. The rat is put in the cage all alone. It has nothing to do but take the drugs. What would happen, he wondered, if we tried this differently? So he built Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats. It's a lush cage where the rats would have coloured balls, tunnels to scamper down, plenty of friends to play with, and they could have loads of sex. Everything a rat about town could want. And they would have the drugged water and the normal water bottles. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, rats hardly ever use the drugged water. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. But maybe this is a quirk of rats, right? Well, helpfully, there was a human experiment along the same lines. The Vietnam War. 20% of American troops in Vietnam were using a lot of heroin. People back home were really panicked because they thought there would be hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war was over. But a study followed the soldiers home and found something striking. They didn't go to rehab. They didn't even go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped after they got home. If you believe the old theory of addiction, that makes no sense. But if you believe Professor Alexander's theory, it makes perfect sense. Because if you're put into a horrific jungle in a foreign country where you don't want to be, and you could be forced to kill or die at any moment, doing heroin is a great way to spend your time. But if you go back to your nice home with your friends and your family, it's the equivalent of being taken out of that first cage and put into a human rat park. It's not the chemicals, it's your cage. We need to think about addiction differently. Human beings have an innate need to bond and connect. When we are happy and healthy, we will bond with the people around us. But when we can't, because we're traumatized, isolated, or beaten down by life, we will bond with something that gives us some sense of relief. It might be endlessly checking a smartphone, it might be pornography, video games, Reddit, gambling, or it might be cocaine. But we will bond with something because that is our human nature. The path out of unhealthy bonds is to form healthy bonds, to be connected to people you want to be present with. Addiction is just one symptom of the crisis of disconnection that's happening all around us. We all feel it. Since the 1950s, the average number of close friends an American has been steadily declining. At the same time, the amount of floor space in their homes has been steadily increasing. To choose floor space over friends, to choose stuff over connection. The war on drugs we've been fighting for almost a century now has made everything worse. Instead of helping people heal and getting their life together, we have cast them out from society. We have made it harder for them to get jobs and become stable. We take benefits and support away from them if we catch them with drugs. We throw them in prison cells, which are literally cages. We put people who are not well in a situation that makes them feel worse and hate them for not recovering. For too long, we've told Tony about individual recovery from addiction. But we need now to talk about social recovery, because something has gone wrong with us as a group. We have to build a society that looks a lot more like Rat Park and a lot less like those isolated cages. We are going to have to change the unnatural way we live and rediscover each other. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. This video is a collaboration with Johan Hari.
Pretty nice video, right? Pretty cool. Yeah. So it gives you an idea, like as nurses, we treat the patient more than we treat that. So, all right, all around the world, changing policies and procedures on a national and global effort will help combat the issue of misuse. That is only a band-aid for the much larger issue. Nurses and other healthcare providers must get to the root, that the cause of the addiction, and treat the underlying cause that drove the patient to opioids. Only after that can the opioid crisis be diminished from its rampant climb. And we're done. Any questions? Anybody? Nobody. Thanks.